don't know if you can tell that this is a giant hot pool. I'm in the middle of a giant hot pool in Waka Village in Rotorua. It's just really, really like surreal. And the most surreal part of the whole thing is this is where my Airbnb is. I made it, y'all! Welcome back to my channel as we continue my very long and epic journey across New Zealand. For those who haven't seen the previous videos, I spent about 3 weeks in New Zealand. I started at the very south end of South Island and made my way up to the North Island. Got to see a lot of cool places, meet a lot of cool people, do a lot of cool things. Still didn't have enough time to do everything. After 4 nights in Wellington, the capital of New Zealand, it was time for me to head on to my next destination, which meant another long bus ride. My bus left Wellington about 9:15 that morning, was supposed to get into Rotorua just after 5 that afternoon. Up until this point, I'd had fairly good experiences on the New Zealand bus network. Our bus from Wellington was a little bit more grueling because our bus driver decided to blare his stereo music for the first 3 hours of the ride. So loud that I could hear it blaring through my noise canceling headphones. You could not drown that out. By the time we made it to our lunch spot at about 11:30, 12, my head was pounding from the loud music. As I mentioned in previous videos about my bus journeys, these long haul buses are required to take at least a 35-minute break. So they use these 30-minute breaks to allow the passengers to get off the bus, stretch their legs, get some lunch. This particular break took place at a location called a tea room. It wasn't so much a tea room as a cafe where they had more New Zealand pies and you could get a coffee or a tea and some water and use the restroom. And it was also right next to a farm. So after we ate, we walked around a little bit and petted some of the friendly animals that came up to the fence to say hi. And when we got back on the bus, the driver was noticeably grumpier, but the music was turned down. I have no idea what happened. I'm just grateful the music was turned down. The rest of the journey was fairly quiet. As I've also mentioned in previous videos about my other bus journeys across New Zealand, the drivers on these long-haul bus journeys will meet at a central point and switch buses so that they can go back to their hometowns and not have to be switching back and forth every day. And on the other buses I'd taken so far, these switchover points usually happened at a central bus stop location or in conjunction with our 35 to 40 minute lunch break. But on this particular ride, our bus driver pulled us over on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere and just said, "Your new driver will be here in a minute. Have a good day," and left us there on a bus in the middle of a sheep farm, surrounded by gorgeous scenery. And a few minutes later, another bus did pull up, and then another bus driver got on our bus and said, "Hi guys, I'll be taking you the rest of the way to Taupo," and we continued on our way. And one of the many things that I didn't get to do during my time in New Zealand was pay a visit to the Tongariro National Park on North Island. Tongariro National Park is home to 3 stratovolcanoes that are still active, one of which was used as the iconic Mount Doom in the Lord of the Rings films. And of course it's the one I can't pronounce. So I didn't actually get to visit Mount Doom on this trip, but I was able to see it from the bus. Far off, in the distance, through the clouds and the rain. We had a really quick bus change in Taupo and then another hour bus ride up to Rotorua. Rotorua is famous not only because of its rich Maori heritage. There are ancestral Maori villages all around that area, some of which are still being lived in today. It's also famous for its geothermal activity. Due to its location on the Ring of Fire, Rotorua is filled with hot springs and mud springs and geysers and all sorts of geothermal activity. It's kind of like Yellowstone, but with an ancestral Maori village right in the middle of it. It's estimated that the Maori originally settled the Rotorua area between 1250 and 1300 AD, and the European settlers did not become aware of it until about the mid-1600s. In the early 1900s, a European doctor devised a plan to build a spa in Rotorua to utilize the natural geothermal muds and hot springs, and thus the famous bathhouse in the government gardens was built as a way to attract wealthy tourists to that area of New Zealand. My main attraction, however, was the rich Maori culture and its proximity to Hobbiton. I had the privilege to be able to stay inside of Wakarewa Living Maori Village. My Airbnb host Louise actually grew up in another Maori village nearby and then moved into this ancestral house that was in Waka Village, and she rents out one of her bedrooms as an Airbnb. The full name of the village is a sentence that translates to the uprising war party of Wahio. Wahio was an ancestral chieftain who settled in this village some 4,500 years ago. Wahio gathered an army together to avenge the death of his father, and kind of cloaked by all of the geothermal steam in the area, he and his war party performed a rather vicious haka that struck fear into their enemies. They then charged into battle, won the battle, and their ancestors have lived in that area ever since. It's really cool to get to stay in this Maori village that's also in this geothermal field, because you're surrounded by all this history, getting to walk by the marae, getting to walk through the village, especially at night when there's like no one out on the street. It's kind of dark and there's just this like eerie sulfur steam floating around everywhere, and you kind of just hear the bubbling of the mud pools. It was a really cool experience to be able to stay in this village, and I'm really grateful to Louise for opening her home up as an Airbnb and for allowing me to stay with her for a few days. Louise was really knowledgeable about the best places to eat and local attractions and stuff to do in the area. Every morning she would kind of ask like, okay, what are you gonna do today? Do you need any suggestions? And then every night when I came back, she would still be awake and say, hey, how did everything go? Did you enjoy it? So she was a really great resource to have while staying in the area. It was just about dinner time when I arrived, and Louise recommended a restaurant called Poco. You go up these stairs and then it's just this little room with a bar and a kitchen. They serve tapas. They were a little restaurant and we serve little dishes. I ordered a flatbread with olive oil and I tried a veal. And I chased down all my flatbread and veal with a good old cheese plate for dessert. One of the many things I loved about New Zealand is you could eat cheese plates with fruit and jam for dessert, and that was totally acceptable. I was like, I could do this. This is good. My first day in Rotorua was clouded over and rainy, and since I was already in Waka Village, it seemed appropriate to start off my visit to Rotorua with a tour of Waka Village. Waka Village offers a self-guided geothermal trail. It kind of feels like you're in an otherworldly Yellowstone. You're surrounded by all these like steaming mud pools and hot springs, but you're surrounded by all of this native New Zealand flora. You do have to pay to get in, but it is a self-guided tour. They give you a map and they kind of show you where all the trails are, but they also offer a guided tour of the village itself. Our tour guide was a descendant of the people of Wahio, who originally settled in this area. Today there are about 250 people who live in this ancestral land and utilize the geothermal activity for bathing, cooking, and heating their homes. Originally, tour guides were all women because the men were either out working or off at war, so the women were able to subsidize their husband's income by providing tours of the village. And this tradition, at least at Waka Village, has persisted to this day. Our tour guide showed us how the people of the village have traditionally used the extreme temperatures in the hot springs to boil their food. They would put vegetables or meats in these nets and then dip them down into the water for a certain period of time and let the water just do all the cooking for them. While we were there, they had a bag of sweet corn that had been boiling in the hot spring, and they gave us some samples to try it out. Our tour guide also showed us the communal bathing area, which is still in use by many families today. And being in the village as a guest, I would occasionally see people walking down the street in a bathrobe with a towel heading to the communal bath area. This is actually why Waka Village doesn't allow any visitors into the village past about 5 p.m. to allow the villagers who still enjoy using the communal bathing area to be able to do so without having tourists walk in on them. Our tour guide also showed us around the village, which was built on the ancestral Maori ground in the early 1900s. We got really lucky at the very end of the tour. We got to see one of the famous geysers erupting. There were originally 5 geysers in the Rotorua area, but 2 of them have sort of kind of dried up, but there are still 3 that are fairly active. At the very end of the tour, I was convinced to attend Waka Village's cultural performance at 11:15. It ended up being the first of many cultural experiences that I had during my stay in Rotorua. Maori culture and heritage in the area, and each village experience has a different cultural presentation and experience. Afterwards, on the advice of Louise, I walked 10 minutes down the street to Tapoya Village. So this is now just the other side of the geothermal area. This used to be connected to Waka Village, but certain things politically happened, so now they're two separate things. They're hoping soon one day the gate will come down and there'll be one big happy geothermal village again. The entrance to Tapoya Village is literally a 10 to 15 minute walk down a street and around a corner from Waka Village. And you can see the same geysers from Tapoya Village that we saw back at Waka Village. Our tour guide at Tapoya was a guy with a full face tattoo. The Maori are really well known for their intricate full facial tattoos called the tamoko. The Maori believed that the head was the most sacred part of the body, so the full facial tattoo had a special significance and was a symbol of their status or their nobility. The original process for applying these tattoos to the face was incredibly painful and time-consuming, so only the men have the full facial tattoo and the women have a smaller version that's only on their chin and their lips. As a result of Tapoya looking out at the same geyser field as Waka Village, when I got to my tour at Tapoya, the same geyser was erupting again, so we got to enjoy it erupting again from a different angle. Our tour guide then showed us the village marae and explained the significance of the marae structure.
This is to the top being that main one that we've chosen, and the slanted carvings coming down on either side are representations of the arms of the ancestor spread out in a gesture of welcome. At the same time, we have those large uprights on either side, and those are the legs of the ancestor. So the gesture, the posture is one of protection, of welcome, to come and be shouted by your ancestor.
The interior of the marae is designed to represent the ancestor's spine and rib cage, so that by entering the marae, you are symbolically entering into the body of the ancestor the marae is dedicated to. The marae in these Maori villages are still in use today. The other cool thing about Tapoya that our tour guide showed us is the New Zealand Maori Arts and Crafts Institute. The Institute offers young Maori people a free education in order to learn about their history, their culture, and their traditional Maori arts and crafts. One interesting thing we learned at the Institute was that the Maori adults tend to wear these little green amulets. The amulets are purposefully shaped to look like an infant. Their limbs are kind of curled in on themselves, their head's kind of lolling to one side like a newborn not able to support its own head. And the reason they wear these amulets is to remind them that their duty is to protect the weak and the innocent. And once I knew that, I started noticing it more, especially at the cultural performances. You would see people wearing these amulets. One of my souvenirs from Tapoya is a set of little dolls in traditional Maori costume, and they actually are wearing little tiny infant amulets as well. So it was really cool to kind of understand the significance of that. That evening, it was time for my first cultural experience. When in New Zealand, one does not simply do one Maori cultural dinner show, one must do as many as physically possible, and I managed to do two. So on the evening of my first full day in Rotorua, I attended the dinner show at He Patu Maori Village. A bus came and picked us all up and escorted us down to the village, which was a little bit south of Rotorua. The village isn't necessarily inhabited now, but it is ancestral ground where a Maori village used to be. As we arrived at Te Patu village, we were informed that there had been a death in the Maori family that runs the production, and that we, as the audience, were being welcomed to experience a traditional fire ceremony in memory of the dead. We were informed that this was a very sacred tradition for the Maori people, so we were asked not to photograph or record the ceremony. We were all ushered into this courtyard and instructed to stand in a semicircle around this fire pit. The Maori family, a father, his children, and several of their other younger relatives proceeded to recite some Maori chants in memory of their dead relative. And then we as the audience were invited to go around the circle and speak the names of our friends and relatives who had recently passed away. We were then ushered further into the village where we were split into smaller groups. Each group was sent to a different station, and we were invited to participate in traditional Maori games, Maori activities, and learn a little bit about Maori history and legend.
The way of preserving our culture was through our carvings, our chant forms, our prayer, incantation, also what we call whakapapa. You'll know it as family tree or genealogy. We take our time to study that, just so we know all of our different intertribal links, and we know where we come from, who we come from, and all those things.
We were also given some samples of Maori-inspired cuisine, specifically for the women, was learning how to use the poi balls. Traditionally, warriors would use the poi to work on their wrist dexterity to help them in battle.
Many years later, the ladies picked it back up, modernized it to keep it alive in our culture, and now we use it to tell stories through song and dance.
Today, Maori women are known for their intricate poi dances. We did not get to do anything that intricate. We, the tourists, had enough trouble just trying to work with one poi. But it was really cool to learn how to use the poi. After that, we were guided into another structure for the actual Maori performance. We were treated to about a half an hour presentation of traditional Maori songs, dances, legends, performed by these younger Maori people. So not only is it a really cool way for tourists like myself to learn about the Maori traditions and see the dances and the haka and everything, it's also a great opportunity for these young Maori people to learn about their ancestral legends and their ancestral song and dance and be able to carry that on to the next generation.
I'd like to tell you one of our famous love stories. They talk about two of our illustrious ancestors, Hinemo and Tutanekai, who were forbidden to be with each other due to social differences. Hinemo being a high-ranking maiden and Tutanekai was just a mere warrior. But love will always find a way. Tutanekai, he lived in the middle of Lake Rotorua on an island known as Mukui, and every evening he would play his flute, just so that the sound would drift across the waters to the ears of his beloved Hinemo. Now Hinemo, she lived on the shores of the lake. And one evening she defied her father's orders. She went to the lake's edge and she tied calabashes about her waist, or boards, just to help keep her afloat. And she slipped into the cold, dark waters of Lake Rotorua, and she made the 3-mile journey as she swam to the island, under the cover of darkness and only guided by the sound of the flute. Now she did reach there, ladies and gentlemen. Not too sure what happened that evening, but standing before you are direct descendants of that long-ago romance.
show, we were guided to yet another building for a Polynesian-inspired dinner. It was not a traditional hangi dinner, but the food was really interesting. It was a multi-course meal where we were served salads, we were served entrees, we were served desserts. At one point, they brought a large grilled tuna to our table. In New Zealand, a tuna is actually an eel. So basically, we were served this giant platter with a grilled eel on it. We were at a table of like 6 to 8 people from all around the world, and most of them were like, ew, no, I'm not touching the eel. But one young Italian guy and I said, whatever, when in New Zealand, it actually wasn't all that bad. It wasn't really all that fishy. It had kind of a mild flavor. So after the cultural performance, we got back on the bus and were driven back to our various lodges, where I went to bed with the sound of glorious Maori song and dance echoing in my head. On the advice of my Airbnb host Louise, I headed out to Waimungo Volcanic Valley for a hike. It's rife with hot springs and mud pools and all kinds of geysers. There's even an underwater volcano that will periodically erupt. You can't see the volcano from the trail, but if you look really closely through all of the sulfur steam, you can see it bubbling on the lake's surface. The Waimungo Volcanic Valley is a great place to just take a hike and enjoy the native flora and fauna of New Zealand and get to see some really cool hot springs and geysers. At the base of the trail, there's also a lake, and there's a boat that can take you across the lake. It's supposedly a very beautiful ride to the other side of this lake, but I unfortunately didn't have time to do that. So I ended up catching the shuttle and going back up to the visitor center, grabbing yet another delicious New Zealand pie at the visitor center, and then hopping back on the shuttle to head back to Rotorua. Now, one of the things I really wanted to do when I was planning my original trip to New Zealand back in 2020 was getting to experience the Rotorua Redwood Tree Walk, which was conveniently located right next to Waka Village. Louise knew a shortcut to get from the village over to the redwood forest, and from there I was on my way. These are the same variety of redwood trees that grow in the famous redwood forest of California. And yes, I got to drive through a tree when I was in Northern California. The redwoods in New Zealand were planted in the early 1900s, so they are considerably younger than the ones in Northern California. The redwood trees were originally brought to Rotorua by settlers who intended to use the trees for their lumber. But once the trees started to grow, they realized that it wasn't the right type of lumber for what they were trying to do, but by then the trees had just kind of taken over, so they're now just kind of part of the New Zealand foliage. Today, the redwoods of Rotorua are home to several really nice walking trails and bike trails. After wandering around in the forest and getting incredibly lost, I finally made it to the Redwood Tree Walk. The Rotorua Tree Walk consists of about 28 swing bridges suspended between the redwood trees. Between each of these swing bridges were these platforms that were built around the trunks of the trees, and on these platforms they had information about the history of the redwood trees and the history of the forest and the history of the building of these swing bridges. And it's just really cool because you get to look out over the forest floor below you and see all of these huge megalithic tree trunks surrounded by the native ferns and the native bush of New Zealand. So it's just really unique. There is a part of the trail where you have the option to go up a flight of stairs to a higher trail and then you come back down on the other side. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to do that. The swing bridges themselves consist of these long wooden planks with these net side rails that you can kind of grab onto. They're very elastic, they're very bouncy, they move with every step. So I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to go up even higher than I already am. But when I reached that point in the trail, the stairs were made of metal and looked pretty sturdy, and I was like, okay, well, when in New Zealand, the stairs themselves are solid and made out of metal, but they are still on the same suspension system as the rest of the bridges. So as you're climbing up these stairs, the stairs are also swinging like the other suspension bridges. It is a truly terrifying experience. But it was totally worth it to do this, to get this really bird's eye view of the redwood forest and the natural flora and fauna beneath all of these megalithic trees. The Redwood Tree Walk is a really unique experience. If you're in the Rotorua area, I highly recommend it. They also offer a nighttime tree walk where you get to experience the tree walk at night. The tree walk is illuminated with these really uniquely crafted luminaries that are suspended in the trees around the trail, so it's totally safe. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to experience that on my trip. There's definitely going to have to be a return to New Zealand trip because there's so much I didn't get to do. That evening, I had to rush back to my Airbnb to be picked up for my second Maori cultural dinner show at Mitai Maori Village. Their cultural performance opens with the warriors making a grand entrance in their canoes. At the beginning of the show, we were treated with a traditional Maori welcome ceremony. Unfortunately, we weren't allowed to take any video or photo of the welcome ceremony, so I'm not able to share that with you, but I will try to describe it as best I can. We had to elect one of the men in our group to be our chief, who would then approach the chief of the Mitai Maori village and offer a leaf as a symbol of peace. He walks forward, places the leaf on the ground to show that he means the people of Mitai Maori village no harm, and then a warrior comes forward, and if the warrior picks up the leaf, then you are officially welcomed into the village as guests. At which point, our chief was supposed to give a speech thanking the chief of the Mitai Maori village for allowing us to visit his village, where we were treated to about a 30-minute performance of traditional Maori songs, legends, and dances.
What our ladies ask themselves, is this warrior the right one for her? He's not bad looking. He's quite handsome. So handsome, he could be ugly. But she says, are you the one? Come with me and let's find out.
After the cultural performance, we were guided into a dining hall where we were treated to the traditional hangi dinner buffet. They took us outside and showed us the traditional hangi, which is an under-earth oven heated with hot stones where they put meats and vegetables and all kinds of other things together, and they let it cook for several hours. In conclusion, my assessment of the two cultural performances I attended, I enjoyed the performance at Te Patu a little bit more, but I enjoyed the traditional hangi dinner at Mitai Maori. It was a little bit more what I was expecting to experience at a cultural dinner with a traditional hangi dinner with traditional Maori food. That isn't to say that the Polynesian-inspired cuisine over at Te Patu wasn't good, but it wasn't a traditional hangi dinner. I do recommend attending both cultural dinners, but if you can only attend one, definitely take the difference in the menu into consideration. And that was my adventure in Rotorua, New Zealand. I have said this before, throughout my adventure, I will say it again, I did not have nearly enough time to do everything there is to do in the Rotorua area. I could have very easily spent another day or two in this area, attended some of the other cultural experiences, had some more hangi dinner, but unfortunately it was time for me to bid farewell to the unique and richly historic Rotorua area and head on to my next destination. If you haven't seen my previous New Zealand videos, I'll put links to those down in the description, and I hope that you will continue watching. Okay, I hope to see you next time. Bye now.